time is no longer near. It is in fact here. The host is seated with Voxcaster prepped. The guests are ready with data slates and codexes in hand. Recorded on an undisclosed planet just outside the heart of the Imperium. Lock and load your bolters and sharpen your choppas. Stratagem is about to begin.
Ladies and gentlemen, I hope you're prepared to exercise your minds with this week's episode of Stratagem. I'm your host, Andrew Freeman, and I've got some strategy experts with me breaking down your favorite 40k and Age of Sigmar armies so you can go out and destroy and conquer friends or foes. On a legal note, none of the things said in this show represent Games Workshop or any of its affiliated companies. This show is in no way affiliated or owned by Games Workshop. This show is created by 10 guys that enjoy nerding out to OP formations that put so much cheese on the board it makes grown men cry! Today I have with me Nick, welcome back, and BJ, or BJD as you're now known.
There you go.
Because we have two BJs in the group now, which is just crazy. One's a Chaos player, well known, and one is also a very well-known Stormcast Eternal player. We've gotten together today to break down the Generals Handbook 2017, which I hate that they put the year on it because, you know, what the hell, guys. 2018 is only 4 months away, maybe less. Today's episode is going to be a little bit different. We're going to be breaking down a new rule book, so there will be no core build. There will be no get ripped. No, that's going to be happening. We're going to be talking about what's new in this General's Handbook. So, guys, what's new?
Alright, so first off, we've got an awesome new game mode called Triumph and Treachery, and it's played with more than 2 players, 3 or more. You can do scenarios, or you can do your typical just fight to the death kind of scenarios. The best thing about this is you get treachery points, which you can use to do fun and hilarious things, like if a unit tries to run, you can stop them from running, or you can have a player's unit charge for the unit, and it's all based on the number of treachery points you have. The way it goes is a player who is going picks an enemy, and then the other players in that game become neutral players, so they roll like a d6, and they can gain an extra treachery point. There's all sorts of different things, like the player who has the most victory points gets a treachery point, and then the player who has the least gets 3, and then everyone else gets 2, so there's a fun balancing mechanic with that. And, I mean, it's pretty much just your typical, like, play with your friends and screw each other over as much as you want.
There's also new gameplay multiplayer. They added multiplayer in the whole thing. It looks awesome. I've already been doing Age of Sigmar multiplayer leagues. What do you guys think about that?
So the new Generals Handbook does stuff like setting up multiplayer rules for how you can determine teams. You can do roll-off for sort of team captains. You can base your teams on the number of wounds. You can base it on the number of points that people normally do. There's also a new thing called Confederation, where depending on your allegiances, you can roll a dice and you can decide who's versus who. One of the newest things are Generals and Warlords, which I think is really awesome for this. So once you have your teams established, one team decides who their warlord is going to be, and the warlord gets the final call in everything. If there's a dispute, the warlord makes the final say. There's also their finest hour, which is the warlord, before the game starts, they roll a d3 and then add 1 to it, and depending on that result is the battle round in which their effect goes off. And depending on what they roll, it's stuff like subtracting 2 from the enemy's wound rolls for attacks made against the warlord's general. And then their save becomes 2 up. So they're all just these outrageous buffs to the warlord. Going on, they've introduced a fog of war mechanic, which I think is really fun. Basically stuff like players can only discuss strategy with each other if their 2 generals are within 3 inches of each other and there are no enemies within 3. And then stuff like charge declarations, where you have to write down who's charging who. You can't just sit there and discuss stuff. So I really like that it makes the players have to rely on each other. Another mechanic they're doing is Divine Intervention, which at the start of a team's hero phase, you roll 2d6, and if you roll less than your bravery, ridiculous stuff happens. But there is criteria that has to happen. Orders is at least half of the coalition's starting units have been slain. And they get stuff like, if you make the roll, like Godly Strike, choose 3 enemy units that are within 6 inches of each other and have between them a combined wound characteristic of 30 or more. Then you roll a dice for each unit, and on a 1, nothing happens. On a 2 to 4, they suffer d6 mortal wounds, and on a 5 or more, they take 2d6 mortal wounds.
That's very lore-driven, if you've read the lore.
Yeah.
Like, in book 1, there's like a dude praying because they're just getting slaughtered. The Stormcast are getting slaughtered so bad, and he does this divine prayer, and next thing you know, lightning is striking the chaos right out of the towers that they're at. So I really like that they're putting that into the gameplay.
There's more stuff to it, though. It's not just the Godly Strike. You get Shield of Fate, where friendly order units immediately heal D3, and then you can re-roll failed saves for friendly order units. And then Divine Inspiration, you don't have to take Battle Shock tests. So it's these really huge, Divine Intervention, huge swings to momentum that can easily change a game.
So another thing that they added was something called Siege Warfare. It looks really awesome. The picture they have is a bunch of Sylvaneths surrounded by chaos. Tell us a little bit about that, PJ.
Yeah, so this is one new gameplay that I'm pretty excited about. It's called Siege Warfare. It adds a siege phase to the game. The siege phase happens before the battle begins. So basically, both players, both players will choose a siege tactic. So you can starve, batter, or tunnel. Are 3 of the tactics that you can choose. Both players will choose their tactic, and then there's a siege table in the book that you reference, and it will tell you basically what the siege effect is depending on how both players chose. So, for instance, if you choose a siege effect of starve, could be the attacker rolls a dice for each defending unit, subtracting 1 from the roll if the unit is a hero. And then you apply the relevant modifiers from the siege table, and on a result of 5 or more, the siege suffers D3 mortal wounds. So won't go into all the detail of the siege effects, but that's basically will kick off the siege warfare. And then there's 2 battle plans in the book that are specific to the siege warfare as well.
Fantastic. Anything else new that we should dig into, especially with gameplay? Is there anything new?
Rules of 1.
Funky. Yeah, we're going to get into that. That's probably going to be more into the changes segment because it's a rule change. All right, let's move on to our next segment, changes.
Changes. Turn and face the strain. Changes. Don't wanna be a richer man. Changes. Turn and face the strain. Changes.
All right, guys, what has changed? What's changed with match play?
Well, I have to call out, first of all, Rules of 1 and the addition of allies. So with Rules of 1, a couple of key Rules of 1. No artifact of power, similar item can be taken more than once in the same army. So I know I used to like to buff my bloodthirsters with similar artifacts. No longer can do that. Of course, I think one big game changer is going to be the use of allies. So I noticed on the Games Workshop website yesterday that all the Monsters of Chaos were sold out. which I'm not surprised by. Now that, in a 2,000-point game, we can have 400 points worth of allies. It's going to be a fun way to incorporate those monsters of chaos into our armies, where otherwise they were just sitting on my shelf collecting dust. Because who wants to give up the blood tithe, right? I mean,
Nobody.
Nobody wants to
Nobody
give up the
wants to,
blood tithe.
but no.
So we've got the new rules of one. There was a lot of duplication issues with the previous edition, I feel, and they've really kind of fixed that. So the first rule of one is each spell can only be attempted once per turn rather than by once per wizard per turn.
So I can't put 16 wizards down and do Mystic Shield? What?
No, you cannot. You also cannot attempt to... Or even if you could, even if your rules say that you could cast the spell again, the rule of one states that you cannot do it. The second rule of one is a roll of 1 to hit, wound, or save always fails. By the same token, a roll of 6 to hit or wound always succeeds. In both cases, this applies to the rule after any rerolls have been taken, but before modifiers are applied. The third rule of one, any extra attacks, hit rolls, or wound rolls gained by the use of an ability cannot themselves generate extra attacks, hit rolls, or wound rolls. And the example they give is the Ripperdactyl's Rider's Voracious Appetite ability. The fourth rule of one, you cannot re-roll or modify the roll at the start of each battle round that determines who chooses the player that takes the first turn. And the fifth rule of one is no artifact of power or similar item may be taken more than once in the same army. So you can't have like 2 obsidian blades or 2 quicksilver potions.
So it mostly nerfs Zinch, pretty much casters in general, and it nerfs your buff abilities for Stormcast Eternals. Nerfing the 2 strongest armies in the game. I really like the rule one. I feel like it's going to even out a lot of armies. People aren't going to be using the same command or the same relic or the same Mystic Shield. Mystic Shield. I know I played against Nagash once, and he mistakenly attempted to do 5 Mystic Shields with Nagash on 5 different characters or units.
Yeah, well, it also nerfs him since you kind of need other, like Mortarchs and other such leaders to increase his spell pool. And he may have like 9 spells a turn or something like that, but if he doesn't have anything to do with them, then they're wasted slots.
Although his unbinding is still worthwhile.
Oh,
Yes, yes, it is.
Yeah, that is definitely true.
All right, let's move on to changes in points. A lot has changed in points. They've sort of brought this whole new discount system into play, and I'm loving that. What do you guys think?
Yeah, so obviously we have the new cost for hordes. So if you max out a horde's units, then it's a reduction in cost and points. So, for example, 10 bloodletters have actually gone up in point cost. They used to be 100, now they're 110. But if you max the unit out at 30, you only have to pay 270 points. So there's a savings there. So obviously they want to encourage the hordes. One thing I like as a Chaos player, and I can really only speak to Chaos in this way, but a lot of the points across the board for Chaos has gone down. The way they have offset that is the battalion points have gone way up. So now I think they're forcing us to make a decision. Do we take a battalion and get the extra benefits, or do we forgo the battalion and take a whole extra unit? And that's a decision that we're all going to have to make. Slaves to Darkness went way down.
Yay!
Except for the Chaos Sorcerer Lord. He went up by 20 points. And then the Zinch Skyfires, I think, were a key unit that was pretty significant last year's tournaments. Went up to 200 points.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, but the Order also got hit with point additions. Kurnoth Hunters, they got a boost.
they did. And I'm okay with that.
As am I. They're probably the strongest distance unit in the game at the moment. The Skyfires, they also have a very... So they're sort of nerfing distance fighters. What other changes have we seen in Order? Especially Stormcast Eternals, because we know they got nerfed a bit in this one. They got mostly nerfed in this one.
They should have gotten mostly nerfed.
So, being the amazing Stormcast Eternal player that I am...
Very humble of you.
No, you can take that part out.
No, I'm going to keep it forever.
So Star Drake used to be 600 points. It's now down to 560, which is awesome. Celestinate Prime was 360. It's down to 340.